Hello and welcome to another design talk. I'd like to let you know that Google's decided that it's going to try and convert me and has started sending articles to me talking about suboptimal design and reasons why evolution is true. So Google's trying to do its job. I was really shocked. I received an article by a Norwegian scientist, and I had meant to use it as the backdrop for one of my talks, and I went back to try and find it, and I couldn't. So I did go by memory some of the comments he made, so I'm going to address a few of them and then jump into something else that my research led me into. So the first thing, or one of the things he talks about, was that the appendix has no purpose in digestion. And this really stood out to me because it's something that's been known to be false for decades. When I was in university, they still talked about the appendix as being a vestigial organ, but they did acknowledge that it had a function, and that is to produce antibodies. Immune cells are sent to the appendix during certain time in development to help mature the immune system. As well, a new function is also likely, and that is that it is a storage place for good bacteria. So when we would get a serious infection, like let's say something that caused diarrhea, everything would be flushed out of the system, and that includes good bacteria. So the appendix, it's believed, holds the good bacteria in the case of illness, and then repopulates the intestines following a sickness. Another thing that he mentioned was junk DNA, and how much of our DNA is junk. You'll know from many of my previous posts that that is in the process of being proved very much false. And much of what's been labeled as junk DNA, I've talked about in past videos, and how they're discovering new purposes for these strands that are non-protein coding DNA that do in fact have very important functions, and I fully expect that's going to continue to be the case in the coming decades as research continues. The next thing I remember him talking about was the narrow birth canal in human beings. And while I couldn't go back and find his article, that particular comment made me think about something that I'd come across some time ago, and that was an anatomist recreating a human being without evolutionary flaws. So her assumption is that we are profoundly flawed, and that it would be relatively easy to fix those flaws. So turns out I can just jump from this Norwegian scientist comments right into hers, because there was a whole bunch of overlap. The first of them that she mentions is the retina in the eye. She describes the eye as being wired backwards. And as you know, I've discussed that many times. If you don't, just go back and look at my blog or previous videos, which I discuss the reason why the nerves go into the eye and why the light sensitive rods and cones are facing backwards. There's very good reasons for that. She suggests, instead of using the backwards mammalian eye, we should use the forward facing squid or octopus eye. And I've already addressed that as well. And the reality is that while squid eye is a very good lens, the mammalian eye, or the human eye, is a visual processor. It's like a computer, so it's far more sophisticated. And if we were to take our eyes out and put octopi in, we probably wouldn't be able to see at all because there's so much information that's processed within our eyes. So that was her first comment. The next thing she would change is the ears, and I'll show a picture of this perfect human that she's developed. Her concern is that over time, the tiny hairs in our inner ears don't regenerate, and so one way to compensate for that would be to give us bigger earlobes that would amplify the sound, like, let's say, a cat's ears. She figures that's a good solution. The next thing is the airway, and the Norwegian scientist mentioned this as well, that he figures that we should have two airways, an airway and also a tube for food. Now, we have a single tube at one point in the back of our throats that carries both air and food and water. Because there is a slight risk of choking, her solution is to, hey, why don't we just have two airways? Now, where she's actually going to put those airways, I'm not sure. Clearly our neck would have to be thicker. There may be other issues. I don't have all the answers here. I know there's a very good solution that we actually do have, and it's called the epiglottis. And what the epiglottis does is when we swallow food, it automatically closes and is airtight, and thereby does not allow any fluid or food to go down the windpipe, and that seems to work quite well. Why she feels her design is better is not 100% clear to me, but who might argue with such a fantastic scientist who can improve on our design? There is the next thing she mentions is the recurrent laryngeal nerve, and this is a nerve that starts out high in our neck and goes down, wraps around the aorta, and comes back up. And she thinks this is a really stupid design and would just do away with it. I'm not so sure that we'd want to do that, considering the fact that that's how we talk, is using that nerve. Why it's that way, I do not precisely know, but I have a pretty good idea that there's probably good reason for it. I would also add that the superior laryngeal nerve does take the direct route, and I think that adds weight to the idea that there's a reason that the larynx nerve is recurrent. Lungs, she figures we should have lungs more like a bird, and so we would have a secondary air sac, and that way the air would go one way into our lungs to exchange oxygen and get the CO2, and then it would go out the other way in one direction, and that's how birds' lungs work. Her next change would be the heart. She would replace our heart with a dog's heart, because dogs have a better cardiovascular system, in her opinion, and that if there's a blockage in one of the major arteries of the heart, the other one can naturally compensate. Whereas with human beings, we can have infractions because one of the major arteries blocks, then the blood supply is basically cut off to one section of the heart. Her next change is that she would like to change our spine. It's prone to backaches, etc., and she would like to give us a chimp spine, and she thinks that would eliminate backache. For childbirth, and again, this is where I first came across this, because I was thinking about the Norwegian scientist's suggestion that rather than having the birth canal so low in a woman's body, it should be up around her stomach. And that got me thinking about this picture where this anatomist, Alice Roberts, believes that a superior design would be, rather than having a womb, to have a pouch like a kangaroo, and that would solve the problem of dangerous births. I'm not sure how happy women would be to carry infants in their bodies and how that space would be accommodated, but we're told by Alice, the human maker, that this would be a better design. She next looks at the legs and she says, well, our legs are good generalist instruments. We can climb, we can walk, we can run, but our knees can have lots of problems. And so she figured the best solution would be to give us legs more like an ostrich, so that there would be less pressure on the knees, that the muscle mass would be closer to the body, and therefore less prone to damage and more efficient, and we could run faster. That may be the case, but you would certainly be sacrificing the ability to climb, as ostriches cannot climb mountains, and they would probably also lose stability on uneven surfaces. If you've seen Star Wars and watched the AT-AT walkers, you know how the Ewoks were able to overcome the ostriches by just rolling logs and making them lose their stability. This is not scientific, but I'm just suggesting that there might be a trade-off there. And then finally, to cover all of the things that she suggests, the last one is her skin. She is from Britain and has white skin, and she feels that pale skin's a disadvantage in direct sunlight. But dark skin does not allow for as much vitamin D production. So she would look at using skin like that of an octopus that can change the color of its skin in an instant, and therefore in bright sunny days you could be black. In cold winter months where there was very little sun, you could be white, and that would be a better design. Let me make a few comments here. First of all, it's interesting in perfecting the human body, she uses other design in nature. She's very smart in that way, because scientists all over the world are in a race to look at how nature works so that we can develop better technologies, from better desalinization plants to antibacterial surfaces based on the design of butterfly wings and bird feathers, where there's actual nanospikes that destroy the bacteria that land on them. There are many different examples of how scientists are trying to study life, not only to see how life works, but to see how we can improve our technology. So she's following a good practice there, but it's a pretty poor way of trying to argue for suboptimal design if you are going to take other designs in nature. If nature is so haphazard, if there's no evidence of a creator and it's all chance, why would you not, using your mind, just come up with something that's much better originally? I have two major concerns with Alice Roberts' Perfect Human Being. The first is that there's absolutely no evidence that her designs would be functional. In other words, even if she could recreate human beings in her model image, would they actually function? It's one thing to make gross anatomical changes in a model. It's another thing to be able to make it work in a real life scenario. And since human beings have yet to be able to synthesize a single cell, let alone any kind of multi-celled animal, I think there might be cause to have a little bit of humility here. And the second problem is even more serious, and that is this understanding, this idea, this expectation that because we're a result of evolution, we should expect flaws and imperfections and useless organs. We undermine the cause of science. Great scientific discoveries were made because people believed that God created the universe and that it was orderly and purposeful. So when they didn't know what something did, they sought to find out. And guess what happened? When evolution came along, all of a sudden there was an answer. If we didn't know what a particular strand of DNA did, oh, it's just leftover junk. And so you know what happened? They didn't try and figure out why it was there. And so the cause of genetics was greatly hampered by the concept of junk DNA, which was a direct result of believing that we were merely here by chance. Likewise, vestigial organs. The purpose and use of the appendix would have been discovered far sooner if it was not labeled as a functionless vestigial organ. So the cause of science, and in particular biology, requires that we expect purposefulness, that we expect design. And so, I don't know about you, but I think that's a pretty good reason to think that if it looks designed, if it acts designed, if it gives every indication of foresight, maybe it is designed. That's, to me, the best explanation. All right, take care.